Clifford will present today, and he's well prepared, and the information that he will provide will be of benefit to all of us, and we can utilize it to get a better understanding of the African Union and the process going forward. So, with any other further um, delays, I'll ask Clifford to present. Can I just kindly ask before we start that you keep your sound muted so that we don't have any interference with the presentation? And if you have any questions, go to the chat box posted there. And if you want to raise your hand, you go to the participants, and on the right hand side is a icon that says raise your hand, and you just raise your hand there, and then you will be given the opportunity to pose a question. Okay, so thank you. Over to Clifford. All the best.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. Just quickly, Juliet, can you see the opening slide?
Everything looks fine on the side.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, the presentation that we're going to do today, it's covering two trade agreements, and both of them came into the effect right at the beginning of the year. The one being the new one that we negotiated with the UK after Brexit, and then obviously the African Continental Free Trade Area. But the idea of today's presentation or workshop is not to give you an in-depth study of these two trade agreements. They are far too big to condense and talk about in detail. So the idea that we had is, first of all, we need to sort of open up communication with our members, get them to speak to us, ask questions, and just be interactive. So that was the one objective. And the other one is obviously just to bring you up to date on these trade agreements and give you the bare minimum sort of information that you would need to know at a sort of operational on a daily level. So the presentation is actually very short. It's to the point, it's concise. And what we would prefer to do is make it more interactive so that at the end of the presentation, you guys, whoever wants to ask questions, you can have a chat, ask your questions. It's not just going to be me answering questions. We have the guys from our customs portfolio from South Western Cape that are sitting in. So guys like my colleagues, Mr. Jean-Paul and Johannes and Llewellyn and Basil, these guys are all well aware of the agreements and etc. So between us, we should be able to answer all your questions and hopefully provide the information that you need. I also believe that we've got some members from outside of the Western Cape that are sitting in, so welcome to you. Hope you enjoy it. So that's basically what I'm going to cover. Brexit and the EU, and then the new trade agreement that we've partnered with the UK, and then there's some frequently answered questions, and then we'll move on to the African Free Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, the establishment thereof, and I'll give you some more details on that agreement. And again, there's some frequently asked questions that I'll share. And then there'll be just a closing summary, and then we'll open it up for discussion and questions. So I would like to propose that I actually run through the presentation in its entirety and then ask the questions and have a sort of session afterwards so that we don't disrupt the flow, if that's okay with everybody. And that's the entire presentation as far as Brexit goes. That's where Britain goes from EU to CU. That's the short version. Just thought we'd lighten it up very quickly. But what does Brexit have? Why does it relate to us? So Brexit was the name given to the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union, and it's a combination, obviously, of Britain and exit. But in simple terms, the UK decided to leave the EU so that it could have more control over its borders and its economy without having to abide by the rules of the EU Commission. They felt that they needed to be more independent. The UK felt it was being constrained by the laws and the Commission of the EU, And that's what made them decide to break away. And that was sort of started in the early part of 2014 already. There was sort of mutterings about leaving the EU. But in 2016, the UK actually held a referendum. And that was giving the people of the UK an opportunity to have their say and say whether they wanted to or didn't want to. And that referendum literally split the UK right down the middle. I mean, there were families that were split down the middle. Brothers didn't talk to brothers and fathers didn't talk to their sons because the one would vote for and the other one would vote against. The political parties were split as to which way they should go. And it was rather a messy sort of divorce, if you want to call that. And even after the referendum, when the decision was made, a lot of people actually wanted to change their minds because they felt that the British government didn't give them all the information they needed in order to make a proper decision. They only found out afterwards of what the possible implications would be of the UK leaving the EU. And there was even talk of possibly a second referendum. So it was rather messy and it took a long, long time and it just became like a nightmare. Eventually, in 2020, at the end of 2020, the EU and the UK sort of came to an agreement. And they said they would have time to negotiate all the terms. And the final agreement was signed on the 24th of December 2020 and came into effect on the 1st of January. But that just meant that the two parties had decided that there would be a split, that the UK would actually leave the EU, but all the little bits and pieces, that is still in process. They've got the EU, and you'll see the last little point that I mentioned there, the European Parliament must still approve the EU-UK Trade and Cooperative Agreement. And that's the part that's going to involve, how does the British borders going to work? How all the borders, are they going to be physical borders? Are they going to be new customs laws and regulations? Are there going to be new customs procedures? What is going to be allowed to move, how and when? Those are all sort of things that must still be decided. But what has come into effect is that the UK has now officially left the EU. So now they are completely split. The EU continues to function with all their member states, and obviously the UK and is now functioning on their own. But there's still a fear that there's going to be havoc at border posts, for example. There's immigration issues that must still be decided. That is this very short sort of background to Brexit and what Brexit actually means. So while that was all being discussed, South African government started negotiating with the UK already. Going back to 2019, they started negotiating a new agreement leading up to the EU split. South Africa already knew that the UK was an important trading partner, and we needed to have something in place so that when Brexit actually happened, the UK wouldn't be cut off from us. We needed to export to the UK, and we also need to import from the UK. So it was very important that we had an agreement in place. And the new agreement, and it's called the SACEM UK EPA, and there's the definition. It's the Economic Partnership Agreement between the Southern African Customs Union member states and Mozambique of the one part, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland of the other part. So that's the actual basis of this agreement and who the parties are. Now, the UK, even while they were negotiating their Brexit, they already knew that they would have to establish new trade agreements. They couldn't be cut off suddenly from everybody else and function on their own. So in the last 2 years, the UK has already signed new trade agreements with 55 countries. 6 of those are in Africa, covering 14 countries, and this would be one of those agreements. So they decided that trade between itself and its trading partners will be governed by new free trade agreements, also referred to as economic partnership agreements. And our agreement with the UK and the EPA was signed by all parties in October 2019. And then we were just obviously waiting for Brexit to happen. That came into effect, as I said, in December last year. And basically what the agreement does is, and that last point that I've made on this slide is actually quite an important one. So it says the SARCM UK EPA establishes a free trade area between the SARCM member states and the UK. And this is the important part. It replicates the effect of the EU SADC EPA. In this regard, it replicates the preferential trade treatment of the EU agreement with the exception of the volume limitations on tariff rate quotas. In simple terms, basically what that means is the new trade agreement that we have with the UK is almost a mirror image of the current EU trade agreement that we've been familiar with and is still in effect. So it's literally, it's been taken, it's a copy and paste, if you want to put it in those sort of terms. So everything is replicated. The EU trade agreement has been carried over and it's simply now between us and the UK. So some frequently asked questions just in general that we've picked up over the last couple of months and obviously very recently now since being coming into effect. So must exporters from South Africa be registered under this agreement? And the answer would be absolutely, because this is a brand new trade agreement. So the DA 185s that we use to register for exporters, that has already been amended and it now includes this new trade agreement. The annexures have all been amended and the application process is already open. So people who want to export from South Africa to the UK, you can now register under this new trade agreement. The unfortunate part is at the moment is it's still manual. So your DA 185 must be submitted to your closest customs branch office. But the application process is open. The DA 185 is there. All the annexures have been amended to include the new trade agreement. As far as imports into South Africa goes, are there any changes to the import duty structure? Nope, all the duties remain the same as per the EU column in Schedule 1. So all the rates of duty that applied from the EU applies to the UK. The origin declarations and Euro 1 certificates, those declarations that, or those Euro 1s and certificates that were issued under the previous trade agreement, the EU one, still remains in effect, but any new applications will be in terms of the new agreement. So this is a little bit tricky because the EU declaration is still going to apply, or the Euro 1 still applies to the UK, for example. Nothing changes. It's really the same trade agreement. The electronic certificates, this is an interesting one. I had a client who actually said that he has already applied for and received an electronic Euro 1. So he applied for it online and he received an electronic Euro 1. And I believe that SARS is accepting electronic Euro 1s. But I'm sure during the question and answer session, we'll just sort of verify that and there might be another difference of opinion. But as far as I'm aware, there are Euro 1, electronic Euro 1s being issued and they should be acceptable. Just as an interesting point, and somewhere I've seen a couple of sort of news items where it looks like several countries in the EU may be looking at doing away with Euro 1s as a physical document. There's some countries that I think are looking at possibly doing away with the Euro 1 certificate completely and trying to ensure that all their exporters become approved exporters and you will use the invoice declaration process. But certainly if they're going to use the Euro 1, it looks like some countries, and I think Italy is one that I can think of, where they are looking at doing this electronically. So Euro 1s as a physical document that needs to be stamped and couriered and be presented, that might be sort of looking at the end of its lifetime. I'm not quite sure if all the countries would agree with that. I think countries would still want to maintain some sort of control over those documents, but that's something for the future. I just want to see quickly my little notes that I made, if I've left anything out that's of importance. Okay, just on that Euro, the electronic Euro ones, one of the things that I saw in a news headline was that SADC, for example, they've been using certificates of origin, physical certificates of origin from the 60s. And there are some parties that are saying, so maybe it's time to modernize and do away with these manual documents and make it electronic. Single window systems, for example, cater for electronic documentation. But again, we'll have to see how that goes. One of the questions that comes up is cumulation. So I just want to spend a minute here very quickly. For the context of this particular question, cumulation allows for goods that are, I'm trying to think of the correct way to put it. Let me just think how to word this correctly. Okay. Cumulation refers to goods which contain materials or parts of EU origin, but have been finally manufactured in the UK. These goods will be considered to be of UK origin, but this is a temporary provision that our trade agreement with the UK has put in. So it could be changed at a later stage, but the way I understand it, so if you have something that's going to be manufactured in the UK, but some of the parts came from Spain or France, or some of the materials, and it's going to be exported from the UK under the UK trade agreement, those parts, etc., that was used in the manufacturing process will be considered to be of UK origin. That's for the purpose of this trade agreement. But there is also another rule. When you are talking about consolidating cargo, so where you have goods of EU origin, completed goods, and they are going to move into the UK and be consolidated with goods of the UK origin and then shipped out of the UK, those goods of EU origin must actually be moved under customs supervision. And this is, and my colleague Jean will expand on this a little bit later, but there's a rule, one of the rules that talks about direct transport. So there's two things here that you must look at: goods that are being manufactured in the UK, or goods that are manufactured in a EU country and then shipped to the UK or moved to the UK, consolidated and then shipped from the UK. So we must just be a little bit wary and maybe go into a little bit more detail, those who might experience this, but I'm sure we can expand on that as we go. The African Free Continental Trade Area, and I'm just going to, this is just a slide that shows you how the whole agreement sort of sits in and where it fits. And there's two phases into this agreement. And phase one, you'll see, covers literally all the things that we need to know. It covers all the rules of origin, the trade of goods and services, it covers your tariffs, everything is in phase one. And phase one is actually literally on the go. That's the part that was implemented now on the 1st of January. But there's a lot still to be done in this part. Phase two, you can see, only covers certain things like intellectual property rights, investments, e-commerce will be included in phase two, competition policies. So phase two is more the legal side. But phase one is the part that we're going to be interested in. This is the part where it affects trade literally on a day-to-day basis. So that's just an overview of what the actual agreement looks like. So what is the African Free Continental Free Trade Area Agreement about? It is an agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area, which was signed at the 10th Extraordinary Summit of the African Union Assembly on the 21st of March 2018, entered into force on the 30th of May, and trading under the agreement began on the 1st of January 2021. The main objectives of the Free African Trade Area are to create a single continental market for goods and services with free movement of business, persons, and investments, expand intra-Africa trade across the regional economic communities and the continent in general, and enhance competitiveness and support economic transformation. There's actually quite a few other objectives of this trade agreement, but those are the ones that are probably most relative to us at the moment. Why is this area or free trade area so important to us in South Africa? Well, the agreement will provide a market of over 1 billion people with a GDP of over 2.6 trillion US dollars. And this free trade area is the largest in the world in terms of participating countries. Now, we know that South Africa in general, yes, we do import and export to Africa and from African countries, but not to the extent that we should be. South Africa seems more happy to deal with countries overseas rather than from our own continent, but I think that will change. That's my personal opinion. This will open up markets that have never been accessible before for imports and exports. 54 of the 55 African Union member states have already signed the agreement. 34 of those countries have already ratified the agreement. Eritrea remains the only country yet to sign the agreement, and from what I understand, it looks like they're adamant that they are not wanting to be part of this agreement at all. But the 54 countries, they've already signed. It's now all the negotiating that needs to take place on the rules of origin and the tariffs. All of that is still in process as we speak. So what are some of the important things that we need to know as importers and exporters? As far as this trade agreement goes, 90% of tariff lines will be liberalized over 5 years, 7% additional lines liberalized over 10 years, and 3% of tariff lines may be excluded. So what does that actually mean? Tariff lines refer to obviously goods that are in your tariff headings in Schedule 1 of your tariff book. So when they talk about tariff lines, those are your tariff headings. So 90% of tariff lines or tariff headings will be liberalized over 5 years. That means at least 90% of tariff headings referring to this trade agreement, there will be reduction in duties. Of the remaining 10%, another 7% of those tariff lines will be amended over the next 10 years, and 3% of tariff lines may be excluded. Now, that 3% tariff lines which may be excluded could, and I say could, cover things like your clothing and textiles for various reasons. But those are all still in negotiations. Those have not been finalized yet. Those are taking place between all 55 countries, and all 55 countries need to submit their tariff lines that they want liberalized, and then there must be an agreement, a mutual agreement between all those countries. Again, the same as the EU trade agreement, exporters and producers, manufacturers under this trade agreement must register with SARS. Again, the DA 185 and all the annexures have been amended. This agreement is included in there. And again, it's a manual process, unfortunately. The important thing here to note is that it says producers and manufacturers under this trade agreement must also register. So it's not just exporters, but it's producers and manufacturers. At the moment, as it stands, South Africa has only agreed tariff offers with Egypt and Sao Tome. Now, that means that under this entire agreement, South Africa can only trade with Egypt and Sao Tome. Those are the only two countries where we've agreed on which tariff headings to amend duty-wise and what the rates of duty will be between those countries. Now, I heard the other day that Egypt is actually reviewing some of the tariff lines that they've offered, and there might be some amendments taking place. So, not 100% sure. I haven't seen anything official on that yet. But as it stands, South Africa can only trade with Egypt and Sao Tome as far as reduction in duties goes, because we've agreed tariff offers. The negotiations on the tariff lines and the rules of origin are planned to be finalized somewhere by July 2021. But, oh, sorry, and there's an error in my sentence there. That sentence should end by reading and could possibly take the rest of the year. Because These negotiations have been delayed, obviously with COVID-19. There has been huge delays, and so it doesn't look like all these rules of origin and tariff lines and negotiations will be finalized by July. I think it will be extended quite a way into the end or near the end of the year. But I think they are trying to speed it up as quickly as possible because people do want to trade. The certificates of origin for this trade agreement are not available as yet because the rules of origin have not been finalized. So nobody knows what one country would want in their certificate of origin compared to another. So all of those must be negotiated. What we do know is that when those certificates of origin become available, they will be made retrospective to the date of implementation of the agreement. So what would that mean, for example, if you want to import something from Egypt at the moment, but there are no certificates of origin in place? So how would you use the preferential rate of duty? Well, the way I understand it is that you can't. So you would either have to put your goods into a bond store maybe and defer the duty and VAT until certificates of origin are becoming available, or you would have to pay the duty, but then you would be entitled to claim a refund once those certificates of origin are available because the agreement is retrospective. But at the moment, we are only importing from Egypt and Sao Tome, so there is no preferential rates in place. If you open your new customs tariff book, you will see that there is a column for the African Free Continental Trade Area, and you'll see different rates of duty, but none of them are applicable because none of the tariff offers have been accepted. Only Egypt and Sao Tome at the moment. The existing trade agreements remain in force and take priority. So these are the other trade areas that we deal with, like SADC, SACU, all those free trade or trade agreements, they all remain in effect. Those trade agreements have been in place for years. They were negotiated separately. There's specific requirements in place. So all of those trade agreements will remain as is. And this is covered by Article 19 of the African Free Continental Trade Agreement. And basically what this is, so if I can give you an example, if you're going to import something from, let's say, Botswana, Botswana is part of the trade area that we already have in existence, and there's a rate of duty that applies for a certain item from Botswana. But let's say Botswana was now also part of the African Free Continental Trade Area, but the agreement says that their rate of duty is different. This clause means that you can't choose which rate of duty you want to apply and choose the lowest rate of duty. You would have to choose the rate of duty applicable from the country from which it came. So if it's a country from SADC, you would use the SADC rate of duty. In effect, it means that the African Free Continental Trade Area Agreement is for those countries who are not members of any other trade agreement that we have. Hopefully I've explained that correctly. Again, we can maybe explore that a little bit further in the question and answer session, and maybe there are members of the EXCO, etc., who might have some more input on that, but that is the way that I understand it at this stage. That those current existing trade agreements will remain in effect. They cannot just be done away with. They've been put in place with specific requirements, and those will remain there. Some frequently asked questions about the new Free African Continental Trade Agreement. So, as I've mentioned already, the rules have only been partly finalized, rules of origin, and that's why we don't have certificates of origin as yet. And again, I've mentioned it already, they are supposed to be concluded by June. I somehow doubt it might be later. Must approved exporters register again to participate in this agreement? Yes, as per the UK, this is a new agreement, and so people must register under this agreement using the DA 185 and annexures. They are already available. The annexures have all been updated. Already mentioned, with which countries can South Africa trade and obtain preferential treatment? Currently, only Egypt and Sao Tome have agreed tariff line offers with South Africa. And you might even find that some of the tariff headings with those two countries, there are no amendments to the tariff lines. So in other words, the duties actually may remain the same as they currently are under the general rates. Why is this agreement so important to South Africa? Well, South Africa is the main intra-Africa exporter and importer. 34% of intra-Africa exports are from South Africa, and imports 20% of intra-Africa imports. Are the certificates of origin available? No, certificates will be issued retrospectively to the date of implementation. So currently, and I need to maybe just correct myself here quickly. I mentioned that you would not be able to use a preferential rate of duty if you imported for Egypt and Sao Tome. I'm actually incorrect there. You can, if the exporter in those countries are approved exporters and can provide the invoice declaration, because those two countries are only using the export declaration at the moment. There are no certificates of origin. So if your supplier is an approved exporter in Egypt and can provide you with that declaration on your commercial invoice, you would be able to use the lower rate of duty or the preferential rate of duty, but not if there is no certificate of origin as such. So if you want to look at those two trade agreements in really brief sort of summary, if you look at the new agreement with the UK, they have summarized that everything remains the same until advised otherwise, as per the EU agreement, besides the volume of tariff rate quotas, and exporters must register or re-register under this agreement. So the EU agreement, as we know it, that's it. That applies to the UK. The African Free Continental Trade Area, although this agreement is already in effect, preferential treatment applies only to Egypt and Sao Tome, and the rules of origin as well as the tariff lines are still to be negotiated. Exporters must register in order to participate in this agreement. So if you look at these two agreements and what they mean for us at the moment, very little, because there's nothing that we need to be worried about and say, but we're not ready, or we can't trade and we don't know what's happening. There is literally not a lot that we need to know today. The UK agreement, everything is already in place. It's been signed. We're running with it. The Euro 1 certificates are still applicable. We still have our EU agreement in place. The rates of duty haven't changed. That one is fine. That's up and running. Nothing to be concerned about. The new African Free Continental Trade Area, again, although it's in effect, there's nothing that really we can do right now. In both of these agreements, the only thing that we need to know is that if we are going to export from South Africa to either of those agreements, you need to register. And that process is already open. It's available. The DA185s are there to be used. So you can start that process, certainly. So when everything is in place, you can start exporting. You will have to be registered. So on this side, there are, on the SARS website, there are, there's a lot of information available, especially on the African Free Continental Trade Area. There's a frequently asked question platform. And what I may suggest is that if we find that there are a lot of questions that we cannot answer ourselves, maybe what we can do is, and I'm sure Juliet can assist us, we can send out a notice, and all the questions that we cannot answer, we can sort of consolidate, and maybe as South Western Cape, we can submit those to SARS and get proper answers. But there is a huge amount of information available. If you go and Google that either one of those trade agreements, you will find reading material that will keep you occupied for days. Everything is there. The entire histories are there. The UK one, just as an example, and why we've kept this relatively short and to the point, is because the UK trade agreement is 2,350 pages long. Now, you cannot consolidate that and do a presentation and let everybody know what this trade agreement is. It's just too big. The important points are, how do we trade? what document do we need? And that we've answered. There's literally nothing that we need to be aware of, besides unless you are exporting. So that's the summary of these trade agreements. It's very short, it's very to the point, but I'm sure you didn't want to sit here listening to me speak for an hour. It's a Monday, it's a short week. We wanted to make this more interactive. So hopefully I've covered as much as what you wanted to hear. And I'm quite happy to open it up. And as I say, there are other members in the audience who would be happy to jump in and take questions or answer questions if I'm not able to. So I'll hand back to Llewellyn and to Juliet, and we can take it from there. Thank you very much for the time, and I hope this was of some use, and we look forward to having more of these in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Clifford. So now we open the floor to any questions that anybody wants to pose, and we'll try our best to answer. If there's anything that you're unsure of or you want more clarity on, then surely we will do so. I see there's no hands up.
Sorry, I have a question, if I may ask. So we are retailer, pet stores and import, and we make use of the Euro 1 certificates. I just want to ask in terms of, we still following the process of we obtain the original, so the supplier can send us a copy, but the ultimate goal is we get our original and we clear with the original document. The electronic version that replaces it, how would we possibly identify that this is the valid electronic document? What will stand out to show us that's the actual, like an original document might have not specifically a certificate of origin, but maybe like a watermark or something to show you. But now we're sitting with the electronic copy and only that. So what will show me as an example, this thing is valid? Do you guys know?
Look, from my side, I haven't actually seen one of these electronic ones. I know there was one of our clients who said he had obtained one, but his shipment hasn't actually taken place yet, and he hasn't forwarded me a copy. But I do know there's a sort of concern about signatures and the custom stamp, for example. So your original Euro 1 must have a custom stamp. So there must be some sort of formality that's been put in place where digital signatures can be used and something that validates the custom stamp. Now, from my side, I haven't gone into this in too much detail as yet because I haven't actually seen one of these certificates. But it's certainly something that we can try and find more about and go to source and say, if we receive one of these, how do you validate it? Because that would answer our question as well. Because at the end of the day, it's not us as the clearing agent that needs to validate it. SARS must make sure that that certificate is an original. So they would have rules in place that says, when we receive an electronic version of this certificate, we'll accept this as an original. I'm not sure if there's anybody else on that might have some more info on that.
Thanks, I appreciate the feedback. It makes sense. And I'll look out for some communication or something around it. And thank you for the presentation today. I think it was quite useful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dino. Michael, your hand is up. You can go ahead. Michael, you have to unmute. Thanks.
Hi, thanks, guys. Sorry, my internet dropped out. Just a quick question from a technical point of view. With regards to the African Continental Trade Agreement, would each of those, and you said there's a lot of them, it's the biggest, the largest amount of countries in any one in one trade agreement. Would they all have the same rate of duty if there's a preferential rate of duty like the SADC, or can each country have a different duty? And if they do have different duties, how the heck is it going to fit into Schedule 1, Part 1 under those lists of rate of duties?
Michael, trust you to come up with a question like that.
It's for you, Cliffy.
Yeah, look, this is obviously now, this is where all those rules of origin and tariff lines are being negotiated. And I'm not at that level where I understand how those negotiations take place and how it would work. But I would assume that every country has its own priorities. They want to protect certain markets. I mean, I know, for example, South Africa protects its clothing and textile industry, but that doesn't necessarily apply to every country in Africa. So yeah, that's a trick question. And again, this is something that we can have a look at and try and investigate in more detail. But I would assume there would be some sort of unity and an agreement where rates of duty can't just be implemented willy-nilly and for every country to have its own rates of duty. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a free trade area. There must be common ground somewhere in order for the agreement in its entirety to work. Otherwise, there would be no point. If one country still kept its duty at 45% and somebody else made it free, what would be the point of opening up markets and opening up the entire continent to free trade? So there would have to be common ground on something like that. But again, that's as far as my knowledge goes at that level.
Thanks, Cliffy. Thanks, guys. Yeah, and thanks, South Western Cape, for the initiative. It's great.
Thank you. Johan Marais graced us with his presence, but I see his hand is up. So maybe he wants to comment on something. Okay, Johan?
Thank you, Llewellyn, and well done, Cliffy. I've also learned something from your presentation.
Thanks, Johan.
I would just like to add on to the question that Michael asked. Every country makes a tariff offer. And South Africa's offer to the rest of the participants in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has already been published in our tariff. So if you go under the AfCFTA column, that rate of duty applies to any of the other countries exporting to South Africa. So I think, Michael, there won't ever be a need to publish all the other rates of duties offered by the other countries. So your exporter will have to make quite sure that there is a preferential involved in that country, and for that reason you would then issue as an exporter the necessary originating certificates. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. Makes sense. And then just maybe on the importing side, when we importing something, or South African importers importing something, he would have to look at each one separately and see. Hopefully, they've got a preferential rate that would better his rate that he's busy paying, or that he can afford to have a new importer from. I presume that would be the case.
Yeah, I think, Michael, we, as was done with the EU agreement, you would have noted that the offers were actually published over the period of time it took to implement the EU agreement in its totality. And there are still, even in the EU, there are still rates that apply that are not free by tariff. So as far as we are concerned, if we import from any of the African countries, that rate which is currently published in our tariff will apply. And you will note, especially with clothing, there's still a prohibitive duty that applies. But other than that, most items are free, including those that are under the general column or the MFN, are free of duty. So yeah, is going to, I think, not so much for South Africa, but certainly for the rest of Africa. And as Cliffy mentioned, you know, we have the SACU agreement, which has no duties at all. And then we have the SADC agreement. And there you will note the different duties applied. Hope that answers, Michael.
Thanks, Jan. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so it looks like, so especially the soccer, they would still take preference. Okay, no, helps a lot. Thank you very much, Jan. Thanks, Cliffy.
Yeah, thanks, Jan, for that. Thanks for elaborating on that for me. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Anybody else that needs something answered? Or comments or whatever?
Llewellyn, I can just add that Juliet is going to make this presentation available. And also the recording, we'll probably put this on the South National's website. So it will be available for anybody well, for those who want a copy of it and for those who couldn't attend today, but it will be available.
Yeah, that's correct. Okay, I think there's no other comments or questions. So thank you very much for your time. We will have more of these to unpack some of the issues that we feel we just need some assistance and guidance with, just to understand it better. So we look forward to the next few months so that we can, you know, help ourselves and develop everybody. Okay, and you know, share information as much as what we can. Thank you very much. Thank you, Juliet, for putting it together. That's all from us. Have a great day further until we see each other again.